What got me into the PhD program or into the graduate school in the humanities, I had the opportunity when I was in high school to study Latin, and that sort of got me started on this whole path of the classics, and I was able to study them in undergrad, and I just kind of fell in love with the topic of ancient Rome, and that's kind of where I've ended up now.
Thank you. Saudi?
Sure. Okay. My name is Saudi Garcia. I am a second year anthropology doctoral student at NYU. I study cultural anthropology, and my project is looking at the natural hair movement in the Dominican Republic. And I do work on race, identity, and also digital representations of race and identity as well. So those are some of my interests. For me, first of all, I'm an immigrant and came to this country in order to get an education. So I was always very dedicated to school, but I also sort of was able to receive guidance towards the end of my high school career in terms of the potential to seek an academic path. I did a program called the Leadership Enterprise for a Diverse America when I was 16 and 17. And that was a college preparation program, came with like writing prep, and also a really important sort of theoretical summer workshop on a lot of different issues that raised lots of questions for me. So through that experience, that sort of intellectual awakening, I, came to college with lots of questions about society and inequity and things that I wanted to pursue. And so I pursued those things in many different ways and eventually came upon the Mellon program, which was really foundational and important for me. So through the Mellon program, I was able to conduct research for the very first time, started writing about Dominicans in the US for the very first time, and decided that I really enjoyed the research process, especially because I did not feel that myself, in terms of generation, in terms of experience, was really represented in the discipline that I was in. So I felt like there were lots of questions that needed to be asked that in my discipline have not really been asked about the Dominican experience, about Dominicans in the Dominican Republic. So I just kind of, through this combination of activism and also like understanding the need for people of color to be in the academy to take up space, and also my own general research interests, was able to convince myself that this was the path. And did other programs like the Institute for the Recruitment of Teachers, which I can discuss, that really were able to set me on a good path to be able to do this. So I guess I would say it's been like a combination of my own interests, a combination of a sense of political mission behind the kind of work that I'm doing that needs to be done right now. So.
Thank you. Kimani? I don't think your sound is on. Let me see. Can you try speaking now? No. If you can you join us through the phone? There should be an option for you to join through the phone, and we can move on to another panelist and then come back to you. So let's see, Christopher.
Oh, I already went.
Oh, yep, you did. Aaron?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. My name is Aaron. I am a fifth-year doctoral candidate in Spanish and Portuguese at Northwestern University. I am studying U.S. Latino literature, and I am looking at it through the lens of Latin American tradition, right, of immigrant writing and immigrant narrative. So my project focuses on the ways that U.S. Latino narratives enact certain crossings of various Latin American ethnic communities and national communities in the United States. So I'm really looking at the ways that immigrant literature and especially narratives of border crossing facilitate a kind of U.S. Latinidad. So it's looking at questions of identity, but also it is looking at questions of affect, right? How do Latinos come together? What makes a U.S. Latino, right, as opposed to a Latin American identity, right? And so it is looking at all of those questions through through a U.S. Latino and also a kind of hemispheric Latin American tradition. And so similar to Saudi, I think that one of the things that really got me interested in pursuing a PhD is my own life experience, right? My dissertation is really informed by my own life experience. I'm an immigrant from Mexico. I crossed the border when I was 9. And so a lot of that really shaped who I was. I started to look at how the immigrant experience was seeping into the everyday life of my family, the everyday life of me and my friends, our life experience. And so a lot of that really contributed to my intellectual curiosity, which is something that Saudi mentioned, and really compelled me to think about a PhD as a career path. And really, when I was when I was completing my bachelor's degree in Whitman College, which is in Washington State, I really thought that I really enjoyed the classroom environment, especially the college classroom environment, and so I thought that was a place for me to go. And so really that's my trajectory, and that's how I got into this PhD program.
Thank you.
Sure.
So, Kamani, can we see if that works now?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay. My name is Kamani Gibson. I am a third-year PhD student at NYU in history, and I'm focusing on the African diaspora, looking particularly at West Indian immigrants in Panama during the 20th century. And I got into wanting to be a professor, becoming in the academy, because I always knew I wanted to go as far as I could with whatever I pursued, even in high school. But it wasn't until I took my first college course at Drew University where I was placed in a course with a Black woman professor who taught African American history, who really opened my mind to what can be done with history. Before that, I was always good at history. I liked history, but I never thought of it as a career option for me. And seeing how much she enjoyed teaching and enjoyed engaging with her students, and seeing how history wasn't just reciting dates and facts as we were taught in high school, it actually encouraged me to think about what ways I can possibly contribute, or how I could possibly use history. So throughout my undergrad, I was able to start the research that I'm currently doing, uncovering the history about my family, where my great-grandfather worked on the Panama Canal. And I eventually went to the more undergraduate research apprentice program at UNC Chapel Hill, where I continued to develop my project and looking at West Indian immigrants, particularly Jamaicans, and how they contributed to the environment, the creative society, and the community in Panama during the late 19th, early 20th century. Mm-hmm. And currently I'm now working on looking at how this community is identifying themselves, how they're struggling with identities both nationally in Panama, but also transnationally, engaging with theories of Garveyism, British subjecthood, but also labor radicalism. So it's kind of been like a long road, but I'm getting ready to defend my proposal pretty soon in a few weeks. So,
Yay!
Yeah. Awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you. And last but not least, Jose.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. My name is Jose Vega. I'm a 6th year in the Department of English at the...
Actually, can you speak a little louder? It's hard to hear.
So I'm a 6th year at the Department of English at the University of California, Berkeley, and I study Renaissance English literature. And my work shows how the English Renaissance created the hate speech against Hispanic people by invoking them as an apocalyptic threat. And I got into that topic also, as Aaron shared, through my experience as an immigrant from Mexico, and through my desire to see how other forms of otherness, be it religious or otherwise, were kind of created in the pre-colonial era. And so the main reason that I got into graduate school was for social mobility, because I wanted to see this through. And what's kept me going is the opportunity to teach, and hopefully the opportunity to see more and more students who look like me, and for me to be someone who looks like them and works in these ways.
Thank you. So our next question is, what has... Hello?
Sorry, I think Maribeth
Yeah.
has not answered the question. Is that right? Who?
Mary Beth, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry. Are you
Hi,
not?
hi
Okay.
everyone. I'm Mary Beth Gassman, and I'm a professor at the University of Pennsylvania.
Okay.
It's fine, Aaron. I'm also the director of the Penn Center for Minority Serving Institutions, and the lovely Andrew and Andres are both my wonderful PhD students.
Oh, great.
I'm so excited that they're hosting this, and so yeah, all of our team at the center, we wrote this grant proposal, and we're funded by Mellon. And I was just sitting here, kind of watching how beautiful you all are. So I'll use my mic, okay?
Okay. All right. Well, great to meet you.
Our next question for the panelists is, what has your experience been like in graduate school? Can you touch on any transitions you have been through and how you overcame them? For example, how did you deal with moving to a new city, being away from home, and finding fun things to do outside of your graduate program?
I can start.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'll begin with the part about fun, and that's actually something that I actually considered while I was applying to PhDs, and that's part of the reason why I decided to come to Chicago, because it's a large city, and I wanted to be around uh, people who look like me, right? In the university, oftentimes it is difficult to find that community, especially in institutions that like Northwestern that don't have many people that look like you. And so for me, it was important to be surrounded by a community, right, that looked like me, that shared my culture. And so Chicago seemed like a good fit. I was considering other schools, and that's one of the elements. I can't say that's the only element that I considered, but that's definitely one of the elements that I considered when I made my choice about where to go. As far as transitions, right? The question about transitions. I can say that as a PhD candidate, there was a very big transition, not just between going from my undergraduate career into the PhD. I actually made the transition between BA and PhD program without doing a master's in between. So that was definitely, I think, a challenge that that is a little bit different than going into a PhD program with a master's in hand. I think there's a particular challenge to that I had to confront. And so for those of you who are thinking about making that similar transition, just keep it in mind. It's not something that I would discourage in any way, but it is something that might be a little bit different experientially than pursuing the master's track and then the PhD track. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, there was also a very big transition between the coursework part of the PhD and the dissertating part of the PhD. And so those two are, I think, are two very different halves of the PhD program. And so for me personally, it was a transition that was very difficult to go through, particularly because I was a very good student with no experience about doing a dissertation. And so that transition was very difficult, and it's still something that I'm having to negotiate in some ways. But it is something maybe to keep in mind, to inquire about as you're applying to programs, to ask the DGS, the Director of Graduate Studies, as you're applying to programs, about what that looks like, how many years you take coursework, what the transition between coursework, qualifying exams, and dissertation writings look like. I would encourage you to ask those questions, because that transition, I think, is very real. I don't know what others think about that, but yeah.
Thank you. Would another panel? Oh, thank you.
So my transition, I definitely agree. I also came straight from undergrad to a PhD program without taking a break. And that first year was very difficult for me, just adjusting to what was required in the PhD program, the reading, definitely scheduling your time and everything like that. Even the second year was a little difficult because I was doing exams, but you adapt, and it's something you kind of learn on the fly. It's something that someone explained it to me as a kind of a baptism by fire, and it's something that you really have to go through to make until you get to the end. And I think that's one of the best pieces of advice I got, that my first year is going to be hard, but I just have to push through, do my coursework, and make it to the second year. And I think one of my biggest struggles that I had in transitioning was this kind of imposter syndrome and that's something that I'm still dealing with, regardless of dealing with, oh, I'm not good enough to be here, or this or that. But after I took my exams this past spring, in May, you kind of get to this point where you realize, like, you do know a lot of the stuff that you're talking about now, and you are getting to this point where you can talk about these topics in a definitive manner, and your advisors trust you, and they brought you into this program for a reason. They're putting a lot of faith in you. It's not, if you weren't as good as a student as you thought you were, you wouldn't be there. And your advisors in your program are putting a lot of effort into you, and they see a lot of potential. So I think that was one of the biggest transitions for me, just trying to get to that point where I realized, like, I do deserve to be here. I earned this spot, and that I have something to say and to bring to the table.
We have time for one more response for this question. All right. So then, are you going to speak?
Who, me?
Yeah.
No. So, well, I have a master's degree. Okay. So that transition was the transition from my undergraduate to my master's degree was also very difficult. It was a lot of that kind of catching up and that kind of thing, and trying to just keep pace. But the transition, yes, from the master's to the PhD was a lot easier. Though moving from sort of a state school to a sort of Penn was and still is super challenging. But if we can talk about the fun kind of thing, and having fun in grad school, I think it's surprisingly easy. And I think that making friends is a little easier in grad school or different at least than when you're in undergrad, because you're with so many people who are like-minded, at least who are interested in similar things and who have the same kind of passion for education and for thought as you do. So you get these kind of relationships that are much different, and it's really quite easy to make friends, or at least make connections. And that's something that I think is nice to know or to remember.
All right, thank you. So our next question is, were any of you involved with a program similar to HSI Pathways to the Professoriate that supported you with the PhD application process? If so, can you discuss how being involved in a program like that made a difference in your success? And if you weren't part of a program, can you speak about what the process was like without that additional support?
Yeah, so I think I can actually, hello?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, I think my app sort of froze, so if you can hear me, that's good. I can't really see myself, but that's okay. So I can speak on that because I was part of a few different programs throughout, just, in order to, first of all, give me research experience, help me write a thesis and become competitive as an applicant. I also essentially went from undergrad to my PhD program without a master's. And so, like we talked about, that has its own sets of complications. But before that, just to sort of get the applications in was financially challenging, right? I mean, the number of applications that need to go out in order to receive, any kind of positive result, these applications end up costing quite a bit of money. So just like the financial part of it. I did the IRT pedagogy workshop, which is preparing educators of color to go into academic spaces. And so that was very helpful in terms of like the theory of what, how to teach, what to teach, why do we do what we do essentially. But another aspect of IRT was following up after the summer workshop and making sure that we were paired up with someone who was reading our writing. So having someone that was my personal writing advisor for my SOPs, my statement of purpose essays, the many ones that we had to write, individual ones for a lot of individual paragraphs for a lot of schools. Having her as someone that was sort of holding me accountable to sort of get this done. I also worked as AmeriCorps that year, and it was a service program, and it was very intense. And so sometimes I worked at a public school, so I had all these pressures of working. And so, having her, knowing that I would have to check in with her and have progress, made me feel like it's good to have someone that is holding you somewhat accountable in this process, because doing it alone, especially for people that are, supporting themselves, like maybe people that have families, whatever the situation may be, like it's a very time consuming process, it's a very expensive process. So to have someone financially supporting the process, but also in terms of feedback on these essays that just needed to get done, that was really helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I also had the opportunity to participate in a program similar to that. I was a Ronald E. McNair Fellow in undergrad, which is a program that prepares minority, underrepresented minorities, low-income students, and first-generation students to apply to the PhD programs, particularly in the STEM field normally, but they do have room for humanities students, and I kind of forced my way in there. And that was really helpful, like Saudi said, with providing some financial support for the application process, which is really can get really expensive when you're applying to a large number of programs. They also did provide test prep, for the GRE, because a lot of the times that's really expensive, prepping for the actual tests that are important for the application process. And that was super helpful. And just having someone, there was also a research project, and having someone kind of walk you through the process of research, which is something that you often don't have or graduate research, which you often don't have the chance to do in an undergrad situation, was really helpful at just kind of giving you that kind of the window into what you would be doing, and also showing you that you are capable of doing these kind of long-term research projects.
Thank you.
And if you can hear me, I can speak to not having participated in any program or received any structured support. And some of the things that were helpful finding myself in that situation were a lot of research and planning as it relates to reestablishing contact with undergraduate professors who I had worked with. So, for example, researching, looking up when their office hours are, and proposing strategically phone meetings where you can talk to them on the phone and talk about certain strategic aspects of planning, not just asking them to be your letter writers, but asking them if they can connect you with anybody else. And like Saudi, I also worked in education through AmeriCorps between college and graduate school. And pairing up with people who were also interested in applying to graduate school in a program such as that one, and asking them what they're doing to prepare, and building a community of interest in graduate study was helpful there, especially when it came to, maybe getting a study group together to study for the GRE, and things of that sort. So those are a couple of strategies that I used without being part of a program.
Thank you. So the next question, all the panelists can answer, and it's: are there any things you wish you knew before starting your program that you know now?
I can start. One thing that I wish I knew before I started grad school at all, and something that I have to constantly remind myself, is that mostly everybody wants to help you, and everyone is there to sort of teach you. You are still a student, a graduate student, and there is still this. If you need help, it's really important to ask for it. And so if you don't understand something, or if you don't know what you're doing, ask your advisor, ask your professor, and they're 99% of the time going to provide you with some kind of avenue to get you through that little hump that you're dealing with. And that's something that you have to reinforce constantly, because you, as a grad student, will often be like, I have to take this all on by myself. I'm here. This is all about me. When in reality, you're still learning, and you have to kind of remind yourself that.
Thank you.
I think there are two things that I think I have found to be sort of important, that I didn't know before. I think the first thing is definitely establishing some kind of routine that works, like being intentional about the routines that work for you, because everyone's doing this work in very different ways. There are people who don't set foot in the library. There are people who live there. There are people who work into 4 a.m. There are people who don't do this. So everyone's doing it in a different way. And so taking some time, especially in the beginning, to just kind of figure out and fill out what kind of works for you, as a student, as a person in this new environment is really important, and not feeling like you have to get it right away, because it is an entirely new experience. Being patient with yourself is important. And I think the other thing that I have found to be important to me that I didn't understand before is that, containment is very important, because grad school can be everything. It can be your whole life, but there needs to be time to develop yourself spiritually. I think especially for, I don't mean that in a religious sense, but I think especially for someone like me who came in as a recently graduated college student, there's still so much growth that I'm doing that I need to intentionally take time to make happen, even though I'm in grad school, and it can take up all my time. So that means different things. It means sort of, I'll leave it at that. It means different things for different people, but making time for that spiritual growth alongside the intellectual growth, I think, is really important.
Thank you.
I think for me, I wish I knew before when I worked best. So kind of going off what Saudi was saying, it took until last semester when I was reading for my exams I figured out I read most efficiently during the morning. So that made the first year very difficult, because I was trying to read when my body wasn't willing or able to absorb everything. So even like what Saudi was saying, just kind of knowing or experimenting and figuring out how you approach the material, how you can absorb the material within your first month or two, trying different times, trying different strategies, that can definitely help, so that when you get down the road and you're reading for these exams, you'll be able to get through your books and your articles much easier. So that was definitely, it took like midway through like February for me to really get a hang of when I'm best at reading, and that was like 7 o'clock in the morning until like 12 o'clock. After that, I had to do like something else. But yeah.
Thank you.
I agree with Saudi and Kamani on both of those points. in many ways, coming into grad school, it has been a sort of an exploration of who I am also, and there's been a lot of growth, a lot of personal growth, right? So, I mean, often we think of graduate school as purely an intellectual adventure, and it is that, but certainly that's also tied to who you are as a person, right? Who you are as a professional, and so all of that is really important. And so there will be challenges, and I don't think it will be grad school without them. But it is also important that you sort of keep in mind that there will be light right at the end. And so if it is all great for you, then wonderful, right? But I do think that there is always a sort of an element of challenge on a personal level, right, that is involved with graduate school. That's one thing that I think students should keep in mind as they apply to graduate school. And the other thing I think is a little bit more, I guess, academic, right? And that is that when you're applying to graduate school, think about, and especially PhD programs, think about the importance of who will be your mentor, and who will be in your committee, but especially who would be your chair, right? And think about not in terms of institutions necessarily, but in terms of scholars that you want to work with. And that's something that I was very unaware about, right? When I started, I was very unaware about that kind of nuance, and that distinction between bachelor's and a PhD, and graduate school generally. But I had great mentors, right, who were able to guide me in that sense, and I am blessed with a wonderful, wonderful chair. But I do think that it is very important that you think very carefully and very actively, right, about making that connection, that individual connection with the people who you will be working with, right? Because, like I said, it is an intellectual adventure, but also, that relationship that you build with your chair and with your committee is going to be personal in many ways. And so think about that very carefully, and think about that match, right? And not just necessarily the institution.
Thank you. Jose?
So we're talking about things we didn't know before.
Yeah. So what is something you wish you knew before starting your program that you would like to share?
I think in practical terms, one of the things I wish I knew was maybe how to navigate bureaucratic obstacles, because the intellectual aspect of it is something that, just by nature of the fact that you're listening to this webinar, is something that you're going to engage with. But some of the things that might be more challenging concern practical things like funding, or how you understand the role that you're going to grow into as a teacher if you have the privilege of teaching, and things of that sort. So thinking about those practical aspects was something that I wish I knew how to do before. And the lesson learned is that as I transition to my next stage in my professional career, it's something that I'm going to be anticipating. So just having that in mind has been helpful.
Thank you. So our next question, do you have it?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's me again. It's been sitting by the side. I was really inspired by some of the ways in which you were framing about your own trajectories of pursuing a specific PhD in a field. And many of you were talking about how important it was to think about the faculty that you wanted to mentor you in this experience, and also crafting your research interests as well, right? Trying to ask questions that would be suitable for a doctoral program. And the intended audience for this particular webinar is really folks who are in that particular stage of developing their own questions, and they might, be starting that process through readings, through conversations they're having with their current faculty members. And I'm wondering if you have perhaps some suggestions of questions that prospective applicants may want to keep in mind as they're trying to develop their own narrative, right? What are perhaps the questions that you think are good to keep in mind when you're doing a reading to determine whether that's perhaps the area of interest that someone wants to pursue, right? So in summary, right, like what are things that folks should have in mind as they're trying to figure out, where do I go from here?
I'll start. The first thing I would definitely suggest is keep an open mind, because a lot of times you think you know what you want to research and you have this idea all set, then you read something and it changes your mind. And if you're really set on the previous topic, you might not produce as strong as a research paper or scholarship if you stick to that topic, if that makes sense. If you don't if you read something and it really changes how you're thinking about the questions that you want to engage with, it's always great to be open to going a different route where your research was previously going. So that would be one of the major things. You're going to read a lot of things. You're going to find, especially if you're interested in history or anthropology or things like that, or literature, you're going to find a lot of sources that might change or contradict what you were originally saying. And you have to be willing to take that into account and say, okay, this is what I'm going to interpret this as meaning, and going forward from there.
Thank you. I saw there folks nod, so I'm going to invite you to also go ahead and do this.
Okay, I think I'm gonna recommend something that I share with all my students called Ways of Reading. And Ways of Reading is just like a great text for younger scholars to engage reading in a different way. And I can share the link, the PDF that I have to circulate to students. But I think a question to ask, I'm always thinking about being mindful and intuitive, is really asking yourself, why do I feel this way about this idea? Why is this not sitting well with me? Why do I really like this? Why am I really excited about this? Right? Because, for example, in my field, it's all about, in anthropology, it's really a lot about details. And an anthropologist can sort of work with a detail, very minute detail, and kind of really get down to the root of it and research it to an extent that it's really illuminating. And so, but that starts with excitement about something, and it starts with noticing that something feels a certain way, and that you intellectually and sort of intuitively are like, oh, this is exciting. This is so interesting. Where can I go with this? Or, oh, I don't think that I agree with that. And so for younger scholars, it's just developing the faculties to be like, why does this feel this way? And exploring those things. I think that's so important, because that's when you begin feeling like you can speak back to a text or a literature or a set of literatures. But gaining that sense of intuition is so important, and I think we don't really discuss that a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I would also, I would emphasize something that I noticed, right, out of, I think, all of us, if not most of us, which is that for a number of us, right, it was when we were describing our projects, right, the projects are intensely personal, right? And I think that is especially important in the humanities. You're dealing with a lot of reading, a lot of critical thinking, a lot of theorizing, right? A kind of a lot of intellectual labor that can be not abstract, but not applicable in a kind of immediate way, right? That you might see in other disciplines. And so I think what Saudi is describing, that kind of intellectual curiosity, that kind of intensity of emotion when you're reading a text, has to do with what's personal, right? And what calls to your own experience. And so I think for a lot of us who are Latinos, right, who are people of color, right? A lot of that is a challenge, right? Because there are, and there will be, if there aren't already, academic or institutional spaces where that personal connection might be discouraged or might be undervalued. And so to really, my suggestion is to really pay attention to what it is that you are, right, in a very in a very kind of a broad way, and that and your project, your questions will emerge from there, right? And I think that is really important, and that's something that my advisors oftentimes remind me about too. So I think there's really truth to that.
Great.
I just want to make a really quick point about that. You're going to be working with this topic for about a decade or so, from start to finish, till it's a book published. So you want to make sure that it's something you really care about and something that's going to motivate you, that when you're doing your exams, you're going to remember, this is what I want to publish, this is how I'm going to contribute. When you're writing it, this is what I'm going to contribute, this is why I'm doing this is who I'm doing it for. So I definitely want to agree with the personal aspect of why you're doing the research.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you so much. I found all your answers so helpful to keep in mind, and I hope that the folks who are going to be viewing this video also find them as well. I'm going to pass it over again to Andrew.
All right. So for any of our participants, if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat window on the webinar. But until we get some questions, I'd like the panelists to share some words of wisdom before we end the webinar.
Words of wisdom.
Hey, I was just wondering if I could get in on the last question.
Sure,
and,
absolutely.
And just echo what everybody said, and offer the suggestion that a lot of PhD programs in the humanities are looking to cast themselves as interdisciplinary, even as part of their specialization. So take advantage of any institutionally developed opportunities for you to take that class, for example, outside of your department, or invite that professor from outside of your field into your doctoral committee. Because by doing so, you could be the person who casts the lines across the way to bring two fields together in an exciting way, or do something that better speaks to you and the matrix of experiences that make up your identity. And for me, that's something that ended up happening because I'm in an English department, but my interest was always in trying to see how Hispanophone literature, pre-modern Hispanophone literature, could make an impact in the Anglo-American tradition. And that's been very fruitful to date.
Thank you. So we have a submitted question. So before you offer some final words of wisdom, how do you get a good advisor?
That's a great question.
That is a
very important question.
I would suggest, I think this is where the campus visit comes into play, right? So a lot of programs, once you are admitted, they will invite you to visit the programs, right? To visit their campuses, right? And that is your opportunity to connect with the faculty members that you are thinking of working with, right? And so if you apply to a program, I mean, you will have an idea of, the 2 or 3 members of the department that you are applying to, who you would like to work with. And that is really your opportunity to connect with them, right? And I would say, right, I mean, pay attention to the intellectual academic intersections, right, that you and commonalities that you share with those faculty members, but also pay attention to the personal side. I think that's a fair thing to do, and to see how well you connect with them, right? How that relationship goes, right? How that conversation flows, and just pay attention to that. And I think that will be a good way to to at least get a sense, right, for whether that particular department or that particular institution is the right fit for you. But I would definitely suggest take advantage of that campus visit. That campus visit is so important for you and also for the department.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add to that?
So, yeah, I think this is a very crucial and important question to consider. My advisor, I definitely want to just echo Aaron on the point of like this being, it's more than just like you admire their research, obviously, you want to work with them because you've seen what kind of research they produce and who they worked with. But the personal part is like really important. Like you being able to connect with this person, this person having your best interests at heart, but not being malicious. I've heard of stories where scholars, like grad students, have had skirmishes with their advisors, and that just made the writing of the dissertation so much more difficult. So that's something you don't want to get into. So I think it's also really important to get a feel of how you gel with your advisor. And I think there's also something to be said about the difference between an advisor and mentor. So some professors are just going to be advisors and advise you on what to do, how to go about doing this. And there's a possibility that your advisor can actually become a mentor to you and like actually take you under their wing and show you instead of just telling you and what to do. My advisor, I work so well with her because not only is she really invested in my academic production, but she's invested in me as a whole person. So even today I was telling her something was going on and she asked me like, okay, make sure you take time for yourself. So if that's the kind of advisor you want to make sure that's what you look for. Yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add to that? Okay, if not, then final words of wisdom for our participants.
Andrew, can I say something?
Sure.
Well, a little, because I do have a PhD. One thing that I was gonna say is that, you know, especially for students of color, I think it's really important to, you know, get a feel for the person who's going to work with you in terms of, are they going to let you be you, or do they expect you to replicate them? And there are advisors who want you to be kind of a mini me. So there are ways that you can figure that out, see how they react to what you're interested in, see how, you know, are they enthusiastic? Are they supportive? You know, do they challenge, but in a way that moves you forward rather than saying, I think you should do more of what I do, you know? So I think it's so important that, especially for students of color, all students, but especially for students of color, because this was all so personal for everyone here. You know, research should be personal. It's not always, but for most students of color, it is, that it's important that your voices are not muted or taken away. You know, that you have an advisor who helps to elevate your voice and supports you in finding your voice and doesn't shut it down. And it can be hard to find that person, but I think with a few conversations, and I agree that the interview, you know, an interview, most people do offer a campus interview. They usually pay for it. Go to that. It's really important. Or spend some time on the phone talking. The one thing to keep in mind is that faculty want you there. They want PhD students to work with. It's pleasant to work with PhD students. And so you want someone who at least for me, I mean, it's the joy of my life, right? But what you want someone who wants you to find your voice and not adopt their voice. So for me, that's incredibly important.
Thank you, Mary Beth. I have a lovely advisor. So if there aren't any final words of wisdom, I would like to...
I have something. Yeah. So I don't want to leave it off without words of wisdom, but I think there's this idea that academic work is very lonely and very isolated and it's not community oriented and you're just like by yourself all day. But what I discovered, like I'm a social butterfly, I'm an extrovert. I like being with people. So I, found someone to work with, a partner to work with, who's become a close friend. Last semester, we were meeting every morning, and almost every morning, and working together in a library room. So the fact that we were both getting our work done, and the fact that we're like being together motivated us to work. And so there are ways that we can sort of shift this experience. Sure, there are times like I'm in a room by myself right now doing work or will be doing work. There are ways that, despite that this experience doesn't have to be sort of this monastic, lonely experience because that doesn't suit everybody, especially for people coming from communities, from places that are very communal oriented. Coming from my undergrad experience where I was never alone to being alone all the time, it's a drastic sort of shift. And so just knowing that, like, if something feels a certain way, like there are ways that you can work with it and adjust it and like find the people that are going to make your community be what it is. Because honestly, academia is just about communities. It's about who you can know and who you can kind of work with and who can you sort of be with to share this experience. It's not just like this sort of lonely thing. And so I really recommend people being intentional about seeking out others who they jive with to do this with in many ways.
Thank you for that.
I would suggest even,
go ahead.
I would suggest even further, make sure you have people outside of the academy to talk to, just to kind of get away from it sometimes. I find sometimes when I'm talking to some of my friends who aren't academics and they ask me like, oh, so what do? It forces me to even think about my research in new ways to break it down and make it accessible to everyone. Because a lot of times as academics, we develop like the shorthand where we can talk about certain things and we say things so easily to one another. But then this is what and when you guys get to grad school and you start reading books, some academics don't easily translate and they talk in that jargon in their books in a way that if it was a regular person trying to read it for interest, they wouldn't be able to access that. So even like developing and make sure you have friends outside the academy can really be beneficial in terms of your research, but also just in terms of your mental health. That's something that's really important. This is like I mentioned earlier about the imposter syndrome. It's going to be difficult. You just have to power through it, but having people that can really support you and remind you like where you're coming from, keep you grounded, that'll be really helpful.
Thank you. So I'd like to take this time to thank our wonderful panel for providing their insight tonight. For our viewers, if you love this webinar, we're also having one November 1st, which is a Wednesday. No, it's a Tuesday. Same time, same platform, but there will be a separate link. So the HSI coordinators have the links for each of the webinars. This has been recorded, so we will be sharing this video to the coordinators for you to access it. And if you have any questions that you weren't able to ask tonight, you can feel free to email me at andmar, ANDMAR, at gse.upenn.edu, and we'll be sure to include it in our next webinar. Thank you all for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Have a nice night.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye. Good night.